My name is Angelina. I'm 32 years old. I'm a college professor. I have a steady salary, and frankly, I get paid decently. Not exorbitantly, not enough to afford everything I dream of, but enough to get by, pay my bills, and sometimes not have to count every penny. I recently signed the mortgage and became the owner of my apartment, an achievement that on a cold evening brings me back to the feeling that I can truly make a mark in my life. Even as the monthly payment slips like a soft thump in my heart as I send it to the bank, sometimes feeling the balance in my wallet slip through my fingers, sometimes managing my budget with a cold heart, but always knowing that I'm doing it because I simply have to. The thing is, my story isn't just about me and my small victories. I have parents who live in the same quiet rhythm of their concerns, and I have a younger sister, Maya, who is now 22 and just graduated from college and got a job, which in theory should sound like the end of a difficult marathon and the beginning of a calm finish line for the family. And yes, this is great news, but it immediately awakens old tension lines in my chest because Maya has been our family favorite since childhood, and as soon as the 10-year difference between us appeared when she was born, the world turned upside down for me. I stopped being a child and turned into a helper, a second mother, someone who had to grow up faster than generally accepted rules allow. By the age of 12, I was already cooking dinner, doing laundry and tidying the house with tired automatism. And when Maya went to kindergarten, guess who ran through puddles or along sunny paths every morning to pick her up and bring her home? Me. When she started elementary school, I'd walk with her in the rain and the hot sun, leaving my notes and textbooks to walk her to class, and then coming home and trying to get both of us homework done, because my parents were either at work or busy with something important that always trumped family requests. So the mundane tags of, "Angelina, can you help Maya with her homework?" And "Angelina, Maya needs new clothes for school," and "Angelina, can you watch your sister tonight?" played like a constant background noise, like an old record player playing the same record over and over again. Don't think I'm complaining without love. I love Maya as much as you can love a blood relative, someone who shares childhood memories and smells, and she didn't ask to be special in our family, but I was burdened with too many roles, and those roles were eating away at my dreams, so that when I finally turned 18 and went off to college, I felt my first taste of freedom, almost painfully, like breathing air after a long scuba dive. I studied hard, got a teaching degree, and went to teach at a high school right after graduation, and a few years later I moved to a community college, where the pay was better and the hours were friendlier to my life outside of work, and I felt like I could really live for myself. At the time, I was living in a small apartment with an older man named Mr. Peterson. He wasn't just my landlord, he became something of a father figure to me. The man who showed up with the newspaper and a cup of coffee, checked the heating in the winter, prevented absurd rent increases, and was simply there when I called home in pain or joy. When I told him I was buying my own apartment, he said, looking at me as if he were holding a crumpled but precious gift, "You're a good child, Angelina. You deserve what's yours." And those words became ingrained in my inner speech as proof that I'd done the right thing. But despite the new walls and the new mailbox, my parents never stopped nagging at me. Or, to be completely honest, never stopped nagging at me about my salary. Because 4 years ago, something happened that would prove yet another test of my loyalty. Maya was accepted into an expensive private college, a university that sounded like a gateway to a better world to us. But the tuition was astronomical, almost equal to what I would earn in 6 months, and my parents, unable to cover the costs, called me and asked for help. My mother said on the phone, "Angelina, we need to talk. Maya has been accepted to St. Catherine's University. It's a wonderful opportunity, but the tuition is a bit steep. Could you help us out? Just half. We'll pay the rest." And those words, spoken quietly and as if excited, sounded to me not like a request, but like a demand for a division of responsibilities, as if my life, my bills, and mortgage were insignificant details compared to Maya getting the best, and I stood on the threshold of a choice that still resonates in my memory as a turning point. And I couldn't be selfish. I couldn't say no, because in the face of my sister's dream, I felt like a traitor, and so I agreed. I began sending money semester by semester. For years, I transferred amounts that stared at me from bank statements and whispered about how things could have been different, and now I count and weigh all those nights when I didn't buy myself something I needed, all those plans I postponed, and in my mind only numbers remain, transformed into regret. Thousands and thousands of dollars that could have gone towards my future. While Maya was happily attending college, taking pictures with friends at parties, joining student clubs, and posting on social media about how fun and fulfilling her life was, I spent my evenings and summers with the kids, tutoring to scrape together a little extra money for her education. Every time I returned home late at night, my body aching with fatigue and the feeling that the day had flown by, I reminded myself that I had no choice. Someone had to bear this burden. For 4 years, I never went on vacation, never allowed myself even a short break, and when friends invited me to weekend trips to the lake or suggested getting together somewhere in the mountains, I always apologized and declined, until finally their invitations dried up. And I can't blame them, because friendship requires participation, and I increasingly found myself choosing between paying the bill and having coffee with a friend. The worst was last year, when I bought an apartment and was trying to save for a down payment while simultaneously paying for Maya's education and torn between my obligations and her needs. There were evenings when I ate cheap ramen for 3 days straight because I'd spent money on her textbooks and sat in the kitchen with a plastic fork in my hand, thinking how strange it was to become accustomed to such food when you constantly convince yourself it was for your sister's future. Did my parents notice what I was doing? Did they ever say thank you to me? Did they ever offer to repay even part of the debt or even acknowledge the sacrifice I was making? No. Rather, they acted as if everything was natural, as if it was meant to be because I was the older sister, and it was my duty by birth, as if the very fact of being born first imposed a lifelong obligation on me. Maya is such a good student, my mother would say when she called in the evenings, and her voice carried that special warmth I so rarely felt when talking about me. The teachers adore her. She gets such good grades. Yes, of course, because she doesn't have to work evenings to pay for school, because she can focus on books and projects, not on how to pay the rent or how to buy groceries. But finally, this spring, Maya graduated from college, and deep down, I thought that now it was all over, that I was free, that I could live for myself again, go on the vacation I had dreamed of for years, or at least buy new furniture for my apartment, because the old one, bought secondhand, was already creaking and wobbly, as if it reminded me of every victim. And then Maya told me she'd found a job, her eyes shining as she called. But then, almost in the same breath, came a request. She needed help with housing, and somehow that became my problem again. So I rented her a small apartment from Mr. Peterson. He had another property, a nice one-bedroom, perfect for someone just starting out, and the rent was reasonable, not too high but still rent, and that meant another obligation. At first, Maya seemed genuinely grateful. She'd call me saying she didn't know how she'd manage without me, telling me about her new job and how happy she was to feel independent. But with each passing month, the gratitude waned, and gradually her words sounded less like appreciation and more like expectation, as if it were my duty to catch her when she stumbled. Meanwhile, my parents were proud of how well Maya was doing, telling everyone they knew how great she was, how independent and strong, and I caught myself thinking bitterly, independent? Really? Independent only because my money is going towards her rent. And yet, I continued to help because I knew she'd be turning 23 in a few weeks, and I wanted to do something special for her, something truly meaningful. I thought about it in advance, spent months considering options, and finally came up with the perfect gift. I was going to pay her rent for a whole year in advance, covering 12 months in full, giving her the security and freedom to focus on her career without worrying about monthly payments. But even more important to me, this gesture would set a clear end date. Within a year, she would be on her feet for good. I called Mr. Peterson and explained what I wanted to do, and he sighed with quiet warmth and said, "That's very generous of you, Angelina. I'm lucky Maya has a sister like you." "I just want to give her the best start possible," I replied, though a multitude of conflicts clung to me. We discussed all the details. I transferred the money, and sitting in front of the computer screen and looking at the transaction confirmation, I felt both relief and heaviness, as if I'd completed the transaction and yet had another anchor attached to me. The year's rent was paid in full, and when I saw the figures on the statement, I almost physically felt a huge chunk of my savings disappear. But I convinced myself that this wasn't just an expense, it was an investment in our shared future. Maya would feel secure. She would have solid ground under her feet, and I would finally be able to breathe freely, knowing I no longer had to bear this burden every month. Mr. Peterson sent me all the payment confirmations and documents neatly written and signed. I folded them into a beautiful envelope, the kind usually used for wedding invitations, with a soft, pearlescent sheen to the paper. As I held it in my hands, I caught myself thinking that this had to be the best gift Maya had ever received. Something not shiny and empty, but truly meaningful, practical, and generous. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud to be able to give something so substantial. Maya decided to celebrate her birthday at her parents' house because her new apartment was too small to accommodate everyone she wanted to see, and perhaps this was logical. Her parents have a large dining room and a spacious backyard where they can set up tables and give free rein to laughter and conversation. I drove there on Saturday afternoon, the envelope tucked safely in my purse, and a strange excitement, even delight, swept through me. Something I rarely felt at family gatherings, as usually such gatherings left me with nothing but anxiety and a feeling of worthlessness. Now, however, I knew that this time I had something special to share, something that would truly change Maya's life for the better. When I pulled up to the house, I saw nearly 15 cars in the driveway and on both sides of the street, as if the entire neighborhood had gathered for this celebration. Everything inside was buzzing, laughter, voices, music, and I immediately felt a familiar feeling. Formally part of the family, but inside I felt like an outsider, an observer, as if my role had always remained somewhere on the periphery. Maya, meanwhile, was rushing around the kitchen in a cute dress I'd never seen before. She must have bought it with the money she earned from her new job. She looked happy, but at the same time, tense, trying to please every guest, as if the whole evening was an exam that she had to pass perfectly. "Hi, Maya, happy birthday," I said, giving her a quick, slightly awkward hug. "Oh, hi, Angelina," she replied, smiling, but she was already looking past me toward the living room, where someone was calling her name, and I thought, classic Maya, always distracted by those who seem more interesting. Mom came up to me and hugged me as if she'd accidentally brushed my shoulder, her hands barely touching my back. "Angelina, it's good you're here. Maya asked about your gift. She's expecting something special from you." "Well, she won't be disappointed," I replied, patting my purse where the envelope lay. Dad, as usual, nodded at me from across the room, where he was animatedly talking to his uncle, but he didn't come closer, also classic for him. For the next hour, I just stood there, chatting with relatives I only saw at birthdays and holidays. They asked the standard questions. How was my work, if I was dating, if I was planning a family? But their attention still gravitated toward Maya, and the conversation always veered toward her. "She's such a smart girl," one said. "I'm so proud of her for finishing school," another added. "That new job sounds absolutely wonderful," a third concluded, and I nodded politely, thinking to myself, it's easy to focus on your career when someone else is paying your bills. Finally, everyone gathered around the dining table, and the aroma filled the room so much it made me dizzy. Mom had made lasagna, Maya's favorite dish, with crisp garlic bread and that exquisite goat cheese salad she only made for special occasions. And the entire table looked like a showcase of a successful life, where everything had to be perfect, as if no one had ever considered the price of such celebration. The table looked truly festive. Every detail seemed thoughtfully arranged: the elegant tablecloth, the carefully arranged glasses, the delicate candles, even the napkins folded in a special way. At that moment, I caught myself thinking that, despite all the usual anxiety, they were genuinely trying to create a festive atmosphere. We all sat down and began to eat, and the food was delicious, while laughter and animated stories rang out around us. And I watched Maya shine in the spotlight, like an actress on stage, catching every applause, clearly enjoying the role, absorbing every congratulation and every word of admiration. After dinner, Dad stood and cleared his throat, and I immediately thought, well, now comes the celebratory speech, which is a must for any celebration in our family. "We want to tell you how proud we are of Maya," he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "She's 23 years old and she's already made her mark on this world." Mom, in tears, ran up to her and added, "Maya, you've grown into such an incredible young woman. Your intelligence and determination got you through college, and now you're starting this amazing career." I nearly choked on my water as a wave of sarcasm rose within me. Her determination? And what about the thousands of dollars I'd sent over the years, sacrificing my own future so she could go to school? But of course, no one mentioned that, behind the scenes, her success was my work, my money, and my sleepless nights, attributed entirely to her hard work. "We wanted to give you something truly special for your birthday," Dad continued, and I felt the air in the room thicken as everyone waited in anticipation. "Something that will show how proud we are of you and help you begin this new chapter." He walked to the window and, smiling solemnly, pointed out, "Happy birthday, darling." I turned and caught my breath. There in the driveway sat a brand new silver car, shining as if it had just been driven out of the showroom, with a huge red bow on the hood, like something out of a commercial. Maya screamed as if she'd won $1 million in the lottery, jumped up from the table and ran out into the street, followed by everyone else, like children invited to see a miracle. She cried and laughed at the same time, running her hands over the smooth metal as if she couldn't believe the car was real. "Oh my God! Oh my God, is this really mine?" she repeated over and over, her voice ringing with delight. "I'm all yours, baby," Mom said, hugging her tightly, and the scene played out right before my eyes, like a movie in which I found myself a random spectator. For the next 20 minutes, Maya posed for photos next to the car, leaning on the hood, hugging the steering wheel, while people around me took turns congratulating my parents on such a generous gift, as if they were the stars of the evening. Relatives took selfies with Maya in the car, posted them on social media, and the whole thing turned into a real spectacle, with everyone striving to leave a digital trace of her happiness. I stood there, smiling and clapping along with everyone else, but inside, bitterness was building, because I remembered perfectly well what my parents had given me for my 23rd birthday, a card with $50 inside. When I graduated from college, they took me to dinner at Applebee's, and when I bought an apartment, they just said, "How nice," and asked if I needed help moving. But Maya got a car, an entire car with a bow, as if the whole world revolved around her. I tried to suppress my bitter feelings because it was her day, not mine, and I reminded myself that my gift was supposed to be amazing too, if less flashy, but far more practical. Frankly, a year's rent paid was far more valuable than a car with its monthly payments and insurance, but no one knew that yet. When we finally returned inside, Maya was still beaming, her gaze involuntarily drifting to the window every few minutes, as if she were afraid her new car might disappear if she stopped looking at it. "Okay," Mom said, clapping her hands and gathering the guests' attention. "Now it's gift time." A few cousins emerged first, bearing the typical gifts: clothes, jewelry, gift cards, and Maya accepted them with a polite smile. But it was clear her thoughts were still there, in the driveway, near the gleaming silver hood. Then Mom looked straight at me, and her voice was all too clear. "Angelina, it's your turn." Here it was, my moment, the one I'd been waiting for months, preparing myself for, imagining how it would all go and how happy Maya would be. I rose from my seat and pulled an envelope from my purse, carefully tied with a thin ribbon. Inside were all the papers from Mr. Peterson, and I'd already written Maya's name on it in my most beautiful handwriting, as if trying to give this gift a touch of ceremony. "Happy birthday, Maya," I said, handing it to her, my hands shaking slightly, because deep down I was already starting to get nervous. She took it, looked at me curiously, her eyebrows raised slightly. "What is this?" she asked, as if expecting a jewelry box or at least the keys to something shiny. "Open it and look," I replied, trying to smile. Maya tore open the envelope and began pulling out papers, sheet after sheet, a look of mild bewilderment immediately appearing on her face, growing heavier with each passing second. "I don't understand." "What is this?" she said, looking up at me. I, feeling my heart beat faster and faster, must have been smiling like an idiot, because for me, this was a gift, one I'd invested not just in money, but in years of my life. "I've paid your rent for the next 12 months, a whole year in advance. You have nothing to worry about," I said, feeling the words ring with pride and weight. Several people at the table clapped politely, but quickly stopped, noticing Maya's expression. She stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language, one she couldn't understand. "You understand?" I said, trying to be gentle. "Isn't that great? Now you can fully focus on your career and building your future, without the stress of monthly payments." But Maya looked up at me, and there was no gratitude, no joy, no relief in her eyes. There was anger, pure, unadulterated anger. "Are you serious?" Her voice was loud and harsh. A deathly silence fell over the room. Everyone's eyes turned from her to me, and I felt my face turn red, as if I'd been caught in the act of something shameful. "What do you mean?" "I'm serious? Of course I'm serious. It's a really nice gift," I said, trying to maintain my dignity. Maya jumped up and waved the papers in the air like a protest flag. "Are you crazy? This is the worst gift." My jaw dropped. I couldn't even form words. "Maya, what happened?" I finally managed to croak. "What happened?" "Everything. You still have to pay my rent. It's not a gift. It's just something you have to do anyway." Her voice rang out in the silence, and it felt like the walls of the house were closing in. The entire room was now staring at us. The cousins averted their eyes and examined their plates. Friends ostentatiously checked their phones, pretending not to hear what was going on. But the awkwardness in the air was so thick you could almost feel it. "Maya, it's not fair," I said, trying to keep my voice level, even though I was burning inside. "The rent is a huge help, and it costs a lot of money." When I started, no one helped me with the rent. "I don't care what happened to you," Maya snapped. "It's my birthday, and you're giving me something I should take for granted. It's like they gave me the air to breathe and called it a gift." I glanced around the room, hoping someone would back me up, tell me she was overreacting, that her words were unfair. But everyone seemed to be in cahoots, eyes downcast, forks scraping against plates, phones suddenly taking precedence over the situation. No one intervened. "Maya, darling, calm down," Mom said, but her tone didn't convey the slightest hint that Maya was wrong. More likely, she simply wanted to ease the tension, as always. "No, I won't calm down," Maya exclaimed, shoving the papers back into the envelope as if pushing something dirty away. "This is awkward. Look what Mom and Dad gave me. A car. A real gift. Something special. Expensive. Thoughtful." She tossed the envelope in my direction, and it hit me in the chest before sliding onto the table like something unwanted. "Next year, buy me something decent. Something like what Mom and Dad gave me. Something that shows you really care about me and aren't just doing the bare minimum you're supposed to." The silence in the room became so heavy that even breathing seemed loud. Every glance, every movement echoed in my head, and this oppressive pause hung between me and everyone else, as if I suddenly found myself alone in a crowd. I picked up the envelope from the floor where it lay like some discarded piece of paper and tucked it back into my purse. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip it up, and my voice broke as I quietly said, "Maya, I think you should apologize." She looked at me with such disdain that I physically felt a stab in my chest. For what? For having standards? For expecting my sister to even consider what I'd actually like for my birthday? Dad cleared his throat, leaned back in his chair, and said dryly, as if it were a matter of business, "Angelina, maybe you should go." "Mom's upset. We don't want to ruin Maya's special day. Wait, should I go?" I asked again, hoping someone would intervene, that Mom would say, "No, stay. Everything will work out." But Mom, without even looking at me, said in an even voice, "Maybe it's for the best. Let Maya enjoy the evening." I looked again at all the people at the table, relatives, family, friends, even neighbors who had come to celebrate. They were eating, laughing, applauding, watching Maya pose next to the car. But now no one raised a voice in my defense. Everyone looked away, some picking at the food on their plates, some buried in their phones, as if I no longer existed. "Okay," I said and stood up, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. "Happy birthday, Maya." I turned and walked out without another word. Outside, the evening air hit me, and only then could I finally take a deep breath. I got into my car and drove home, though my hands on the wheel continued to shake, from anger, humiliation, and pain. Every traffic light seemed like an eternity. Every turn of the steering wheel reminded me that I was still trapped in this story I wanted to escape. When I finally got to my apartment, I didn't get out of the car for a long time. I sat in the dark, listening to my breathing, and couldn't believe what had just happened. Years, not months, not weeks, years of paying for her college, thousands of dollars I transferred every semester, depriving myself of simple pleasures like vacations or new furniture. Months of struggling to pay her rent, denying myself even proper food. And when I finally decided on something truly generous, a gift that was supposed to give her confidence and freedom for a whole year ahead, she threw it in my face and called it the worst gift in the world. I went up to my apartment, and that's where it all came crashing down inside me. I sank onto the sofa, buried my face in my hands, and burst into tears. These weren't ordinary tears. These were the kind of cries that tear your chest apart from the inside, when you can't catch your breath, when your heart twists with a mixture of hurt and rage. I felt stupid, used, invisible. All this time, I'd put Maya and my parents first, made sacrifices no one even noticed. And this is how they repaid me. Insults and demands to buy something decent next year. And then it hit me. I was done. All this time, I'd been waiting for my family to appreciate my efforts, acknowledge my sacrifices, be proud of me even half as much as they were of Maya. But now I realized clearly that would never happen. I would never be the favorite. I would never be the one they boasted about to others. To them, I would always be just a reliable ATM, an older sister who would pay the bills and then be pushed aside. Well, not anymore, I whispered out loud, wiping away tears. I grabbed the phone and looked up Mr. Peterson's number. My heart was pounding, but my hands were no longer shaking. For the first time in months, I felt a strange calm and clarity of thought. "Mr. Peterson, this is Angelina." "I need to terminate Maya's lease," I said, and for a second there was silence on the line. Then his calm, slightly husky voice replied, "Oh, is everything okay? Do you have a good reason?" "Yes," I said firmly, "a very good reason. I understand this is unexpected, and I apologize for any inconvenience." He paused and then said, "Angelina, you've been like a daughter to me all these years. If you really need to cancel, then you have a good reason. I'm out of town right now, but I'll be back next week. Let's meet and discuss everything. And don't worry, I won't charge you a cancellation fee. I have other people who have already inquired about this place. Frankly, after all these years of you being my tenant, I'm happy to help you." And then the tears came again, but different ones. Tears of relief. "Thank you so much, Mr. Peterson. You're the best. We'll figure it out next week. Don't worry, I'm so grateful." I put the phone down and for the first time all day felt my chest lighten. I hung up, turned off the phone, and sat for a long time in the silence of my apartment, listening to my own breathing and marveling at how unfamiliar this feeling of freedom felt. For the first time in 4 years, all those endless months and years of obligations, I felt like I could breathe deeply, and it was like the first breath of air after a long dive underwater. A whole week had passed since Maya's disastrous birthday party, a week in which there had been no call, no text, from Maya, from Mom, from Dad. Complete silence, as if I had ceased to exist, as if my presence in their lives was only important as long as they could pull something out of my pocket. Part of me, despite all my anger and determination, still hung on every sound, expecting the phone to ring at any moment to see a familiar name on the screen. Maybe Maya would call and apologize for humiliating me in front of all the guests and throwing my own gift at me. Maybe Mom would call to check on me, to ask how I was feeling after being effectively kicked out of my own sister's party. But the silence continued to ring, and each passing day confirmed a simple truth. I existed for them only when they needed to pay something. On Friday, Mr. Peterson called and said he was back in town. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near his office to complete the paperwork and return my money. I arrived early, clutching a neatly wrapped bottle of expensive cognac. I knew he loved a good drink, and this was a small token of gratitude for all the years of his kindness and trust. When I handed him the gift, he raised his eyebrows and said, "Angelina, you really didn't have to do that." I smiled sadly and replied, "You've been more supportive than my own family. I wanted you to know how grateful I am." We sat at a table by the window, and he pulled out all the lease papers. "Don't worry, I'll handle the formalities myself. You won't have to explain anything to Maya," he said. I shook my head. "No, I'll tell her myself that she needs to move out. I can't live like this anymore." He looked at me with understanding and said softly, "Sometimes you have to put yourself first, Angelina. It's not selfishness, it's survival." His words pierced me to the core, like permission to do what I'd been so afraid of my whole life, finally think about myself. I signed the papers terminating the lease, and he handed me a check for the full amount I'd paid up front. So I had several $1,000s in my account again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was gaining control over my own life. That evening, I was making dinner when my phone started ringing wildly. First one call, then a second, a third, all from Maya. I let them go to voicemail each time, not even allowing myself to glance at the screen for more than a second. By the time I went to bed, she had called 23 times. 23 calls in 4 hours, and I didn't answer a single one. Then my parents started calling. First Mom, then Dad, then Mom again. I ignored those too. I turned off the sound, put the phone on the nightstand, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby, without anxiety or the heavy lump in my chest. The next morning, Saturday, at exactly 9 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I didn't even look through the peephole. I knew who it was. All 3 of them were standing there, Mom, Dad, and Maya, her eyes red and puffy from crying, as if she'd been crying all night long. I opened the door, but made no move to invite them in. "Angelina, we need to talk," Dad said, pursing his lips. And then Maya, unable to contain herself, blurted out, "Mr. Peterson kicked me out. You broke my lease. How could you do this to me?" I looked at her calmly and said quietly, "You threw my gift at me and called it awful. You yourself said it wasn't good enough for you." Maya looked away, her voice breaking. "I was just upset." "I didn't mean it that way." Mom stepped forward, folding her arms. "Angelina, that's vindictive. Yes, Maya made a mistake, but kicking her out of the apartment is too much." And then I couldn't help myself. I laughed. A real ringing laugh that sounded more like release than amusement. "Vindictive? Seriously?" I said, still laughing. "I'm tired of being your ATM while you treat me like trash." Dad frowned and retorted, "We don't treat you like trash." I looked him straight in the eye. "Really? When was the last time you called me just to check in? When was the last time you thanked me for paying thousands of dollars for Maya's college? When was the last time you gave me something worth more than $20 for my birthday? Everyone froze, as if time had stood still, and even the air in the hallway became heavy and thick. Maya, sobbing, wiped her nose with the back of her hand and said quietly, in an almost childish voice, "Look, I'm sorry. Okay? I overreacted, but because of you, I had to go back to Mom and Dad." She looked up at me, and there was something simultaneously pitiful and stubborn in her gaze. "Well, that's great," I replied coldly. "Maybe now you'll understand what it's like when things don't come for free, Maya." "Please," Mom interjected, her voice shaking and her eyes filling with tears again. "I can't afford my own place yet. I just started working," Maya pleaded again, as if that were explanation enough. "Then you should have thought about that before throwing words in my face about my gift not being good enough," I snapped, and slowly began to close the door. But Dad reached out and stopped it with a movement, as if to trap me. "Angelina, what more do you want?" he said wearily. Maya apologized. "What do you want from us?" I took a deep breath and said firmly, "I want you all to leave me alone." But they didn't leave. They continued to stand at the door, arguing, cajoling, and blaming me, and I felt my patience exhausted. I literally pushed them away and slammed the door in their faces, turned the key in the lock, and went into the bedroom to avoid hearing them knocking again and again. After that, for several days in a row, they tried to reach me with calls and messages, but I blocked all their numbers. I went to work, went about my business, learned to live without this constant background of complaints and demands, and for the first time in years, the house was filled with true silence. 2 weeks passed when one evening the phone rang and the screen displayed unknown number. I almost automatically wanted to hang up, but my gut instinct told me who it was. "Angelina, it's Mom," a familiar voice rang out, and my legs literally gave way. I gripped the phone so tightly that my fingers turned white and almost hung up, but something stopped me. "We've accepted that you won't be helping Maya with the rent anymore," Mom blurted out quickly, as if afraid I'd cut her off mid-sentence. "But we need your help with one more thing." I froze, feeling irritation rising inside me. "What now?" I asked coldly. "The car we bought Maya," she said hurriedly. "We had to take out a loan and the payments are too high. We can't afford them ourselves." I closed my eyes and my head started ringing. "Are you seriously expecting me to pay for the car loan? The car you gave Maya in front of everyone, for everyone to gasp and applaud?" "Angelina, please," Mom begged, her voice breaking. "The bank will take the car if we can't make the payments, and then Maya will be left with nothing." I felt my throat tighten, but the words came out sharply, without pause. "Then Maya will probably lose her car." "How can you be so heartless? She's your sister," Mom said, her voice laced with despair. "My sister," I repeated, smiling bitterly. "The same sister who said my gift was the worst she'd ever gotten and demanded I buy her something expensive, like the one you gave her? Well, now she can pay for her own expensive toys." And I hung up without giving them another chance to say anything. 2 months have passed since that conversation. No calls, no messages, no visits, only the occasional gossip from my aunt, who occasionally sends me snippets of family news. I learned that Maya is still living with her parents, that the bank actually repossessed the car when they couldn't make the payments, and that Maya works, but earns too little to afford her own place. Do I feel bad about this? Honestly, no, not at all. For the first time in 10 years, I'm paying my own bills, and no one is ripping me off for every penny. I've started saving again, and for the first time in a long time, these savings are my own, not someone else's. I'm planning a trip to Europe next spring, imagining how I'll stroll through old streets, drink coffee on warm terraces, and buy souvenirs just for myself. I bought new furniture for the apartment, a beautiful table, a soft chair, a comfortable bed, and every evening when I return home, I feel like this place finally belongs to me. I live for myself, without the constant guilt, without the constant stress, without the painful expectation that everything I do will still prove insufficient. My family treated me like an ATM for years, and I let them, hoping that one day they would appreciate my devotion. But now I know they must learn to live, earn, fall, and rise on their own, just as I did. Maya is 23. She has a degree and a job, albeit a modest one. She is perfectly capable of managing her life on her own, just as I once had to. And you know what? I am finally free.